PlayStation just wrapped up their big showcase for 2023 after quite a bit of a delay since their last one. We've had State of Plays over the year, but the last big PlayStation showcase was back in 21. And so I think there were a lot of hopes riding on this one potentially being a really massive event. And overall, it was fine. There's some individual stuff from the showcase that I'm really in love with, I was super hyped about, and really happy to see revealed. A couple things that I'm maybe a little more mixed about, which we'll talk about, and one particular thing that honestly did end up knocking a lot of the wind out of the show for me, especially because it was basically the second to last announcement that they had. Though I will say they did end it on a strong note afterwards, at least. First off, let's talk about the good. We got a lot of updates and new looks at some games that we've already known about, some of which are PlayStation exclusive, some of which are not, but a lot of those, at least finally seeing gameplay for, looked wonderful. Alan Wake 2 got an official release date for October of this year, and it looks amazing. Spider-Man 2 got a full focus at the end of the showcase that went for over 10 minutes and looks great. And I think one of the ones that I really didn't actually expect to see today that was a wonderful surprise is that we got our first look at Dragon's Dogma 2. This game was previously announced late last year, but it kind of just got a, yeah, we're making 2, and that was it. So finally actually seeing some gameplay for that and some setup, it definitely looks like it's related to the first game, but finally getting a proper new entry to one of my favorite games of the 360 and PS3 era. Super awesome to see happen. There were also some smaller scale indie games that I was happy to see a lot more gameplay of. The Plucky Squire in particular is something that I've been really excited about, and getting an updated look at that was fantastic. We also got a lot of new game reveals, and this is part of the part that I think gets slightly more mixed. There were a lot of reveals for some games from actual first-party PlayStation studios, but a lot of these were also kind of more concept trailer type deals that didn't really show actual gameplay, but just introduced us to the idea of what this next game they're working on is. This included Firewalk Studios' new game Concord. They opened up with a game called Fair Game, which looks like some kind of mashup of Cyberpunk and Payday, at least conceptually. And then one thing that has been rumored for a while and actually got confirmed at the show, and this is one of the things that I'm a little mixed on for different reasons, Metal Gear Solid Delta. This is a remake of MGS3. We didn't actually see any real gameplay, but there was quite the build-up trailer for it. Look, I'm gonna be honest, Metal Gear Solid is one of those franchises that I deeply love. It's also one that I kind of feel like it's had its time, and while I like the idea of having remasters and new ways of playing these games to keep them around, working on a new project, even if it is a remake, depending on what kind of work goes into it and what changes it, I don't entirely know how I feel about that, especially considering the fact that, of course, Kojima is not involved. Now, on that note, one of the other things they revealed very quickly after Metal Gear Solid Delta is they are doing a remaster collection as well, starting with one very interestingly called Volume 1. This is a collection of Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. So that actually means Metal Gear Solid 3 is coming out twice in the future. But what's interesting about the fact that it's called Volume 1 is what that means for what could potentially be in a Volume 2 or onward. There are obviously a lot of other Metal Gear Solid games that are fantastic that have not had a recent polish up for current systems. I think the one that is most interesting to consider that could maybe happen is Metal Gear Solid 4, that has the current issue of being completely locked only on the PS3. All the other Metal Gear Solid games have had other remasters or been re-released on other platforms or had some kind of remaster. Metal Gear Solid 4 specifically is still trapped on just the PS3. That is the only system you can officially play it on. And so if that first collection is kind of hinting at the idea of maybe we're going to get more Metal Gear Solid collections in the future, the concept of a Volume 2 is very appealing to me. I think another one that was a really big surprise is a new game coming from Bungie that is actually called Marathon. They're going back to that franchise, which if you're not familiar with, Marathon was basically the original Halo. It was what they made for Apple computers back in the day, and so revisiting that franchise is a really interesting thing, and I'm very excited to see what else happens there. There were a couple other new game reveals that stood out to me as well that were either from smaller studios or just kind of out of left field. Ultros was a 2D platforming. It kind of had vibes like it could be a Metroidvania, but I'm really not sure yet. It might just be a 2D action platformer of a sort, but I absolutely love the art style for it, and I want to learn more about it. Phantom Blade Zero was another new game announced that initially had very light Souls-like vibes in the trailer, but actually seeing a lot more of the gameplay in the later parts of it, it's panning out to look like something that's a little bit more of a traditional 3D action game, which I'm very much down for. Ghost Runner 2 was revealed. Sword of the Sea, which is a new game from devs behind games like Abzu, Journey, and Pathless, also looked really interesting. We got a new Night in the Woods game that actually isn't called Night in the Woods, it's called Revenant Hill. Lots of really interesting, diverse looking titles, and there's a whole lot more that I haven't actually had the chance to mention yet. Those are just the ones that really stood out to me. Now, I will say something something about a lot of these reveals, both for these new games as well as for the ones we're getting updated looks at. While some of them got specific release dates, which is wonderful, there were a lot that were just simply 2023, which is interesting to me. When you just say it's going to be planned for 24 or 25, that makes sense. We're looking farther ahead in the future. But with 23, there's 6 months left in the year, and that leaves a little bit of uncomfortable ambiguity, especially after the last couple of years, how so many games have been pushed back as much as they have. Not having hard release dates this potentially close to release is something that I think can cause for a little bit of curiosity for how the rest of the year is actually going to look. And then the thing from the show that was really the gut punch for me that took a bit of the wind out of it is Project Q-Lite is real. This was something I made a dedicated video on a couple weeks back when there were initial rumors circulating about this. If you haven't heard about this before, Project Q-Lite is a dedicated PlayStation handheld focused entirely on remote play. It is not a traditional handheld in the sense of the PSP or PS Vita, where it has its own games that can be played natively, at least not based on what they've told us thus far. Instead, it is purely focused on the concept of remote playing your PS5. Now, while they did announce there's going to be more info coming soon about the device, the main sales pitch for it right now is that while it is remote play focused, it is offering a lot of functionality and features that you don't normally get on other remote play focused devices, like all the things the DualSense controller can do, haptic feedback, adaptive triggers, all that kind of stuff. It is effectively a DualSense controller with an 8-inch screen plopped right in the middle of it. And as someone who is a huge fan of the PSP and PS Vita and handheld gaming in general, I don't really know how to feel about this. Look, I think remote play as a concept is really cool. And I love devices that offer remote play as an option, but something that is focused solely on just remote play only, and on top of that, only remote playing one very specific device, it's kind of a weird sell. And a lot of this ends up ultimately coming down to how it gets priced. The final tune I have about something like this is very different depending on if it's $250 or $120. Now the thing about that is, of course, the fact that a DualSense controller on its own goes for $80 in the first place. So considering this is a DualSense with Wi-Fi connection, stream play, and a display, probably going to be higher than that. But what that final price point is and how aggressive it is going to play a very large role in whether or not it's a neat curiosity or something that just feels way too expensive for what it's offering. Which, to clarify something really quick about this too, I had a few people ask me this right after it was revealed on Twitter, which was the idea of, oh, so are they just making a Wii U? It's a little more flexible than that. Just because it's playing over Wi-Fi so you can play on your couch doesn't mean that it has to be local Wi-Fi. Similar to using remote play on your phone, as long as you have a dedicated Wi-Fi connection somewhere, you can remote play your PlayStation 5. At least that is how it should work conceptually. That is also one of the reasons why something like this raises a couple eyebrows, because aside from having things like DualSense features, this is something that you can already do with the vast majority of phones that people have in their pockets. It might end up being cooler than I'm currently giving it credit for, and again, they said they were going to have more info on it in the future, so that might change my mind, but just as of right now, with what we know about it and what it's being positioned as, I just don't know why. I think one of the things that did feel like a little bit of a missed opportunity for the showcase was just having one other major reveal for some other pre-established IP, which is something we got to an extent. Metal Gear Solid Delta absolutely falls under that window, but it is a remake, and as far as I can tell, based on some early rumors about it, is actually a multi-platform title, not something specific to only the PlayStation 5. But I would love to have seen just like one other IP touched on, even if it's something that we're still going to be waiting a little bit on. You know, Spider-Man 2 was a great way to close out the show. It was one of the biggest highlights of the whole thing. There were other properties from PlayStation that are getting revisited in their own titles, like getting a new Helldivers game out of nowhere, which is actually pretty cool. But when you look at a lot of the talk that was going into this show, a lot of people were hoping for at least one major surprise relevant to a past IP, whether that's a new Ghost of Tsushima game, which probably wasn't going to happen considering how recently the first one still is. But even things like revisiting Sly Cooper or other PlayStation franchises, I just feel like for a major showcase like this, there needed to be one really big surprise unique to Sony. And I feel like we didn't really get that. Aside from the Q-Lite, I guess. I don't know. Overall, I know I'm focusing a little more on the negatives in the back half of this video. Ultimately, I do think it was a solid conference. I think we got a great variety of different games. I think there's a lot of cool different styles, even if some of them are hanging up a little bit in the air in terms of when we'll actually see them fully released. I think there were just a couple key areas that it kind of missed the mark a little bit for what could have been a truly wow-inducing showcase. So those are my thoughts on the PlayStation Showcase. If we do end up getting a new event soon that is dedicated to just the Q-Lite, I'm definitely going to cover that as well because I want to see what else this device has to offer. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, and I'll see you guys later.